Hello everyone, welcome to this new Angular video tutorial. I am Chidumen Namdi, and in this tutorial we'll be looking at two Angular decorators, the at input and the at output. Now let's begin. We'll start with the at input. The at input decorator is used to pass information from a parent component to a child component. Now we have two components here, the book component and the book list component. As you can see in the book list component, it has an array of books, and then it loops through the book and renders for each book the book component. Now going to the book component, you see it renders the characteristics or the attributes of the book, the rights of God, and this is a sci-fi novel. Now you see at our right hand side, you see where it's rendering it. Now this book component is just merely rendering this hard-coded string, while its parent component, the book list component, has the array of books to render. Now, the question arises, how do we pass each book to the book component for it to render? Sorry. Now, we need to find a way in which we will pass each book at each iteration here to the book component so as to render this book, The Vendetta and Man Going on a Revenge, as the first book. Now the thing and the thing is coming as the second book. How do we communicate this data to the book component? Now remember, the book component is a child component of book list component, whereas the book list component is the parent component of the book component, because the book list component renders the book component. As you can see, both of them are standalone components. Now, how do we do it? This is where the at input decorator comes in. We will need to pass each book to the book component so that the book will retrieve the current book in its component and then render it in its template. Now, to do that, as we said, we use the at input decorator. Now, the first thing we need to do is to create a property in the book component class, then specify a property in which we will receive each book details. Now, let's create a property book, and now let's mark it with the book type. We have an error here. Okay, so this book, we can just make it now. Now, this book, we will now have to annotate it or decorate it with the at input decorator. We need to annotate or decorate it with the at input decorator. Now, to do that, we will come here and say at, write the at symbol, then followed by the input, then the parentheses. As you can see, the input, it says decorator that marks a class field as an input property and supplies configuration metadata. The input property is bound to a DOM property in the template. During change detection, Angular automatically updates the data property with the DOM properties value. So by specifying the at input decorator to the book class field in the book component, we have marked this book class field to be a source of input that the parent component can pass a book details or a book type to read. Now you see the input is imported from the at Angular/core module. So, and also when we over it, we can see the details and also how to use it in the Angular docs. Now we will come uh, to the properties or the metadata that we can use while using this at input decorator. We will come to it. Okay. Now, as we have marked this with the at input, it means we are receiving the book details from a parent component and it will be in this class. So we will come to this template, remove this, then use the template interpolation, sorry, and then render it. Then come here, say book.title. Say book.title. Then come here, remove this because already the book details will be in this book class field, and now, say book.synopsis. Synopsis. Now we are done with this one. We save. Right now there is nothing there because nothing is being passed to the book component from this book list component. Now this is what we are going to do. Since we have marked this book component and its class field book with the at input decorator, then we are going to set it as a DOM property to this book element here. So what we are going to do is come here, add space here. Now start with square brackets. Now inside these square brackets, we type in the name of the class field we marked with the at input property, which is book. We'll mark it here, then add the equal sign. Then in between this string is where we'll now pass whatever data we want this book component to receive. Now we are going to send in this book because this book variable the holds the current book in the current iteration. So we'll pass in the book here. So you see the error goes away, and when we save, you see we have all the books listed by this book component. So what happens here is that through the iteration of this at for control flow syntax, it loops through this books array. Then at the first iteration, the book variable holds this book detail and then passes it to this book component via its book input property. See what we did: square brackets first, then inside it the name of the class field marked with the at input property, then followed by the variable or the data we want to pass to it. So by doing this, we have successfully passed information or data to the book component via its book class field. So this book component at the first iteration will receive this in this class field. So it will now render the title and the synopsis. Now at the second iteration, this book variable will have this, and then it will pass it to this book component via its book property, and then this book component will now render it. So at the rendering, it will now look like this. Yes, it will look like this, so that this book component will have this as the value of its book property, and then render the title, the thing here. So we see the thing here. Then the synopsis, the thing is coming, it will render it here. That's why we saw this here. So on a nutshell, this is how the input property works and how we pass data from a parent component to a child component. So remember, this is a parent component, the book list, and its child component is the book component, and we are able to pass the information from the parent component down to its child component, and it was able to receive it. Now let's look at different attributes we can use in the input. As you see in the docs, we have different inputs in the at input decorator. You have the required. You see the required. This is property is bound using its original name. Defining argument requires as true inside is decorator. Now, when we set required as true, to set it, will come in between these parentheses, passing an object. Now, define the property name required and pass it to true. By default, this required is false. So this required metadata in the at input decorator is used to make sure that the property marked with the at input is passed a data. It must be passed a data. It cannot be null or undefined. So as you can see from the docs, required, whether the input is required for the directive to function. So now this input is required. Now any parent component rendering this book component must pass in a data to this component via its book class field. So if the parent component rendering this book component does not pass in any data to this class field, there will be an error. To try that, let's save this, go to the book list component, then let's try removing this. You will see there is an error. So you see, NG8008 required input book from component. Book component must be specified. You see the must. It must be specified. It can never be left out. So it must be specified by its parent component. But if we change it to false, it will compile. Yeah, it will compile because it is not required. So it's just like it's optional whether you want to send it or not. Don't worry, it will compile. But once we change it to true, then you must pass in the parent component must pass in a property to read via the input property or via the class field. So this is the function of the at input and then the required function. Now let me pass in the book here. Very good. Now let's look at another input metadata in the at input property. Let's go down. Now we see the transform and we see the alias. Now first, let's look at the alias. Now alias is used to set a different name from the original name of the class field. Let me remove this. Then let me set alias and say book input. Now this alias sets the name of the DOM property to be used instead of the original name of the class field. So by doing this, if any parent component want to pass a data to the book component, it must do so using the book input name as the property name. If it uses the book property name, it will fail. Now let's save this. So you see it's failing. Can't bind to book since it isn't a known property of book. So we must use the book input instead of the book class field here. So when we change this to book and save, it will render. So alias is just like a nickname or an optional name or another name to be used instead of the name of the class field. Now let's look at the transform. The transform is a function actually, and it is used, as its name suggests, to transform the value of the class field before rendering it. So now the transform is a function. So we define the function. So now the value here will be the value passed to the component via the book or via the input property. So it receives it here, and whatever this transform returns will now be the value of this book class field. Now let's say we just return another thing. Let me say let's just return, let's just modify the book property. Okay, now this value, as we know, is being passed a book type, so we'll change it from any to book. Now we can just simply modify the book and then return a version of it. And now say title is let's just say value dot title and append it a text, let's say transform. Now we run return the modified book. So you see the transform is used to transform the original value of the input class field, and then whatever the transform function returns become the next value of the input class field. So we modified the input coming in to add to the title and just to append the text transform and then return the book. Now this will now become the value of this book. Now if you save it, you see what happens. And bind, okay, sorry, we have to change this from book list to book. Okay, so it's supposed to be title. So you see transformed. So we just transform the title and return the modified book. Now the modified book will now become the value of the book. Listen again. This transform is used to transform or modify the original value of the at input class field coming in. Now the return value of this transform function will become the value of the at input class field. So this modified book will be the actual value in this book class field, while this value will be the value being passed in into this from this book list component. So it comes in here, we'll modify it and return it. Or we can even just simply return the value, yes, if we want. So this transform function is useful in some scenarios. Like for example, let me say we have a number here being returned in a mathematical component that we're using to calculate some values, and we want to just get the square of the number being passed into this property. So instead of uh, adding another property to do that, we can simply use this transform to just transform whatever that is coming in into the square root of it and assign it to the value. So you see how important and useful this transform is in some use cases. Now let's look at some other metadata we have. I think we are done with the metadata. So we have talked about the transform, the alias, and the required metadata. So that's all for the input. Like we said, the input is used for direct communication from the parent component to the child component. Now let's look at the at output decorator. The at output decorator is used for communication from the child component to the parent component. Now remember the at input is used for communication from the parent to the child. Now in the case of this at output, it is used for communication from the child to the parent. Now let's see how it is done. Now let's say for example we have a button here, delete button, and we want, if this button is clicked, it removes that book from the list. Now we have a problem here. This book component does not access this arrow. It does not access it. Now the solution we have in our mind is to remove this book array from this class component and add it here and export it so that this book component can see it. And whenever we click on this, we can then make our deletion inside this component to that array. But the problem is that we don't want to remove this book inside this book list component because it is only solely for this book list component. And this is where the at output comes in, because we want to communicate to this book list component that, hey, see, we want to remove this so book from the list, please do it for us. So now to do that, we'll use the at output decorator. The at output decorator is used to raise an event from a child component to the parent component. So the first thing we need to do is to create a class field. Let's call it delete. Let's just say delete item. Delete item. Then we need to annotate it with the at output decorator. Output decorator like this. Then you see the output also comes from the Angular/com module, just like the at input decorator. Now, whenever we decorate a class field with the at output decorator, then that class field must be a type of the event emitter. So we must come here and create an instance of the event emitter. Event emitter is just okay, it's from the Angular module and a subset from observables and subjects used to raise events and custom events to parent components. So the delete item must be an instance of an event emitter. Very good. Now, as we have done this like this, we can come here, set a click event, then we'll just set a function to it. Set a function to it. Come here, just define the event, the function. Now, in this function, we want, if we click on this, it will call this. Then we will come here, carry this, and call the emit method in the event emitter class. In the event emitter class, as you can see, this emit method emits an event containing a given value. In this case, we're just emitting a void, no value at all. So when this emits a value, it will trigger whatever child component that attaches to this output property. Now, the next thing is, let's now make a connection from the parent component to the child component, which is this book component, so that it can attach, it can read whatever event that is raised from this output property. So what we do is we copy this, go to the book list component, come to the book. Now, in this case, we are not using square brackets. For output, we are not using square brackets. We are now using parentheses. So we'll come here, define parentheses, type in the name of the class field in the child component that was decorated with the output decorator. So which is this delete item. Now, we will now pass in whatever we want, or a function that will receive the event whenever the delete item event is emitted. Now let's write a delete function, delete event function. Now we'll copy it, come here, we'll define the function. Now this delete event method will be called whenever the delete item in this book property raises an event. It raises that event by calling the emit method in the class field delete item. So whenever this emit method is called in the output decorator class field, then this delete event in the book list component will be called. And in between these parentheses, it will be called with the value being passed in between this emit method. Now, first, let's just add a console log. Hello, message from book component. Now, let me save. Very good. Let me open. Okay. Let me open the console. So when I click on this delete, we will see this log, hello, message from book component, in our console. So let me click on it. Okay, we have clicked on this delete, nothing. Oh, we have not saved this book component. Let's save it. And then let's click on it. Okay, no, we need to call this function this delete method here. Need to call it. Then let's save. And then when we click on this, we'll see the message, hello message from book component. So let's see how we can then pass data from this child component, which is the book component, to our parent component, which is the book list component. Now we'll pass this book. Let's see this dot book. Then first we need to declare here that we are passing an input which is of type book. Then we save. So this image, see, we passed the book inside here. Then we'll come here. Whatever that is passed to this image will be here in the event property here. So we'll pass it here and then come here and capture it. So this event is a general event Angular will use to assign the value being passed to this emit here. So we will capture this value passed to this emit method here in this dollar event. Then we will come to the delete event method, then pass in the parameter. Then we know that the value coming in to this emit is an instance of the book type. So we will now make the value to be a book data type. Now, instead of displaying the string, let's just display the book like this. Then we'll save. Very good. So when we click on this delete, the book component will emit this book type, the vendetta. Then we will receive it here. Now let's see. So you see we have received it here. See the title, the vendetta man. So we have now be able to communicate data from the child component to the parent component. And now inside this parent component, we can do whatever we want with this book. So we want to delete this book from this array books. So simply we just need to say this dot books dot just filter out the book. I think filter out any book that does not that book dot title. Filter out any book that has the same title as the book coming inside here. Just change this to current book so that we can current book. So we use the filter out any book that has the same title as the one we receive here. Then assign the remaining to these books. So very good. Now to delete this, when we click on it, it will pass the book the vendetta to this delete event. Then we'll filter it out from these books, then assign the remaining back to the books array. So in doing so, we will remove this particular book that we clicked on the delete. So let's go. Oh, sorry. See, I think I made a mistake. That is not the filter method is kind of very sometimes confusing. Okay, so let me delete the vendetta. So you see the vendetta is gone, the thing is remaining. See, now when we click on the vendetta, it's off. So you see how we have successfully communicated data using the output property from the child component, book component, to the book list component, which is the parent component, so that we can be able to get the book we want to delete, and then from the parent component, which is this book list component, remove that book from the books array and render the remaining. Now let's look at to see if we have any metadata in the output decorator. So you see the decorator that marks a class field as an output property and supplies configuration metadata. The DOM property bound to the output property is automatically updated during change detection. Okay, very good. I think it has it has an alias. Sorry, I missed this. It had an alias. So this alias, like we have seen in the at input, is just used to set another name for the at output decorator. So we can come here and say alias and say, instead of delete item, let's just set it to let's say delete book. Oh, sorry, it shouldn't be an object, it's just a string. So we just remove the object like this. So we have it. Now this delete book will become the name, the output property will bound to this delete item class field. So we save, and we will come to this. delete item. We'll copy this delete book. We'll no longer be using delete item as the output property. So we'll just be using delete book. So you see here we have an error. Argument of type event is not assignable. So we'll just come here, remove this and add delete book, and we have our errors gone. So we save and we reload. I guess we have reloaded. So very good. And when we delete, event data is gone, then delete is gone. So that's all for at input and at output. That's so very easy to understand, and one of the core fundamentals in Angular you need to understand before you can start using Angular as a framework. So let me recap. The at input decorator is used to set a class field to be used to pass info from the parent component to the child component. Now the at input is used to make a communication from the child component to the parent component. So you see the communication pathways, and the class field being decorated with the at output decorator must be an instance of the event emitter, so that whenever we call the event method, the emit method on it, then the parent component, when bound to the output component, will receive the event and whatever payload that was sent from the child component. Thank you so much for sticking with us to the end of this video. Please subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Thank you so much and see you on the next video. Bye.